Let me just start by saying that I've been in the space broadly for a while now. Not as someone that you would recognize, not as someone that has had a huge following, just kind of here. And there's been different versions, different angles, different ways of trying to exist in something that never really stops moving. But across all of those attempts, one thing has never changed, and that's that I have been noticeably unnotable. There's been no real traction, no moment where things seem to click, no point where, I felt that this is it. I have been just the occasional echo into a space that doesn't echo back. And when you sit there long enough in the silence, you find that it's not the kind of silence that you just notice, because it kind of sits in between things, between the posts and the notifications, between moments where you begin to feel like something should have happened. And first, it's easy to ignore because you tell yourself that it's timing, or, that you just need to work on consistency, or that it's just part of the process. But either way, it lingers. And eventually, you start asking questions. They're not big questions, at least at first, the kind of ones that you don't even need to say out loud. You ask, is it the algorithm or is it timing? But the questions become bigger until it's something like, is there something that everyone else understands that I just fail to? But to some degree, that's all, a good sign, because if you're asking these questions, then you're still in it at heart. You're still trying to figure out what stands between you and whatever breaking through is supposed to look like. You're still looking for that gap, the gap that's between you and people who seem to have a voice in the space. Because you look and those people are moving. They're growing, connecting with an audience. They're building something that looks real. And it's not just the numbers, of course. It's you see them and they get validation. You see it when someone that's bigger than them, definitely you, shares their work. It's someone that's established that responds and says their name like it means something, like they mean something. And that back and forth between them creates this cross-pollination of audience, a loop that kind of reinforces itself, but the creators. And once it's moving, no one can even tell where it started from in the first place. But all you know in this is that you are still outside that loop. And you are throwing things out, not randomly, of course. You're thinking about structure and, what makes a good hook or what makes good pacing, because you're trying to do it the right way. Even as you question if the right way ever really meant anything. And there's a very specific feeling that comes with that. because it's not loud and it definitely doesn't hit all at once. It builds these feelings of being unaccomplished or unseen. It's feeling like you are putting effort into this thing that just absorbs it. Like you are feeding something that consumes just to sustain its own in existence. It's all the times where you post something and you check it now, later, and each time you get nothing. And after a while, that doesn't just feel like silence. It starts to feel like you're talking, or you're trying to, but that something's not landing. Like you just don't have signal calling out. Like you're speaking, but in like a dead language that, used to exist but doesn't anymore. And after a while, it starts to feel heavy and persistent, like a pressure in your chest as you're laying down at night, where you are just waiting for the heart attack to happen. And it doesn't for so long that your mind needs to move it somewhere else, somewhere outside of you. So you start thinking things like, why won't they give me a chance? Because, I have good ideas. And you build this belief that if someone just gave you the opportunity, that everything would change. That it's just one moment, one connection, one person from things being right. And then when you're done with all that, you become a little more honest with yourself, because you outsource perspective. And in that outsourcing or emulation, it gets uncomfortable. Because when you imagine what it looks like for them, for these people that you are bombarding, you begin to realize that they are flooded. And it's not just with your messages, it's with everyone's messages and requests. And the audience is flooded with content, short form, long form, meme formats, everything. Bombarded with people that are trying to stand out, that are trying to be seen, and are trying to matter. And when you sit in that perspective, not as yourself, but as them, your mind shifts, because you realize that it's dozens or hundreds of different names with different but similar intents. Everyone standing out or trying to stand out in ways that eventually blur together from atop the hill. And you realize that it's likely not even that they don't want to respond. It's that they can't, at least not to everyone. And you realize that you probably wouldn't respond to you either. And that realization, it changes you, changes your perspective, because it removes the idea that this is somehow personal, that you were ignored out of malice. And it replaces it with something quieter, or at least something harder to argue with. It's a realization that no creative person, especially in this space, wants to grapple with. You realize that you are still a single voice in a sea of voices. You are one of many. And if you stay in that sea long enough, you keep trying, you eventually begin to understand the space a bit better. You'll see more patterns. You'll see what works and what doesn't. And you might even recognize some things before they happen. But that understanding doesn't usually change your position, because that knowledge does not create opportunity. And that's where people get stuck, because we want to believe that it's all merit-based, that there's like this straight line somewhere where you put in effort and you get results out. That if you stay on that line long enough, that it eventually, it pays off. But the longer you're here is the more that you start to feel that is incomplete. Because it begins to feel like probability. Like you are at a slot machine in a casino where there's the potential for a payout because you've seen it happen for someone else. But you don't know when the last hit happened on the machine that you're at. You don't know how long, that payout's been building. And you don't know if the next one will ever land on you before you're out of money. So you keep pulling, and maybe you adjust how you pull with some, level of superstition, hoping that, it makes the process feel better. But nothing guarantees anything. And that's the part that people don't want to accept, because it means that you can do most things right and still get nothing. At least for a long time, weeks or months, maybe years. And if that's where you find yourself, then the only thing that changes in that process is how much you expect it to change. And when you apply it to everybody else, because this is more than a space just for the faces, just for the voices, this concept gets heavier, because the editors, the artists, the managers, all these people who help make things run in the background, for them, it feels more abstract, because you're not just chasing attention. I mean, you are, but not in the most direct way. You're chasing relevance and usefulness in a way that you are trying to exist in someone else's process, in a way that makes you hard to replace. Which is the problem, because in a space like this, everyone is replaceable. And it's not because they're bad, because they are likely very talented. But they're replaceable because there are hundreds, maybe thousands, that are just like them, that are trying just as hard, or maybe they're faster, cheaper, more available, maybe. And all of that matters, but your value, eventually you realize, is not just in your skill set, but it is how you make them feel. because your skill is the baseline. It is the entry point. It is the bare minimum to be considered for consideration. What actually separates you is, are you enjoyable to be around during the process? Do you make the process smoother? Do you avoid making any part of the process harder? Because in a personality-driven space, people choose based on feeling. And whether or not you pick up on it consciously, you start adjusting yourself. It changes how you move. Usually not all at once, or in a way that you notice, of course, but slowly, nonetheless. You become more agreeable. You try to become more responsive. You definitely become more aware of how you're perceived by others, until you are paying attention overtly to every message, every interaction, until you are constantly thinking if you said the thing in the right way. Or even more direct, do they like me? And over time, those thoughts and adjustments add up, which at first doesn't feel bad because it feels like an improvement. These necessary shifts or smart business decisions, until one day you look back and you realize that you don't recognize how you got to how you are. Or maybe you even forget who you were when you started. And at that point, it's not just adjustments anymore. It's your new structure. Because you stopped showing up as yourself. Or at least the version that you could keep track of and understand. You show up as a new version, a simulacrum, a version of you that is easier for them to keep around. And if you are not established, which most of us are not, if you are not established, you realize that you, before you get anything back, will make these changes first. And you will give your time, your energy. You will support other people, maybe for a long time, without receiving anything back. And that's not necessarily, a bad thing, because you get to meet people, you get to help these other people succeed, and you get to feel like you are a part of something. But you still know that you're not getting anything back. And it's not because these are bad people, but because they are focused on themselves and their own path, as they should be, to the point where they don't always see that you are just like them and that you're trying to build something too. And that's me being generous. Like, that's the generous interpretation, because we know that not everyone in this space, as we've seen, lacks that malicious intent. Because some people will take from you because they can, because it's something for them to gain, or they just want to, for that matter. And you, if you don't catch it early, will spend years giving and waiting and trying to justify why you don't have anything to show for it. And that process gives a result that internally is not neutral, because you don't stay the same through the process. You become more drained and disconnected until eventually you feel isolated. And I say isolated, not alone, because alone would be simple. This is being surrounded by people and still always feeling slightly out of reach. Close enough to understand everything, but not close enough to be a part of it. And we've all seen what happens when that happens. And it's not all at once, just that you see less of someone until they are gone. And a few months later, they're just a name that you half remember. And that's the part that seems to stick. Not the failure, just the fading. So all of this, and you decide to keep moving. Not really sure of where it leads, if it does lead anywhere. But you follow the path with some level of hope that something will shift and that there's another possibility that you haven't seen yet. And you stay here in this space between trying and being seen. And most people don't know what to do with that. They eventually spiral, or they pretend that it doesn't exist at all. But I found that there's a third option that I would recommend. I would recommend that you accept it. Not in the defeatist way, of course. That wouldn't be good content, wouldn't it? It's to accept it as this alternate reality. Because once you understand that you're not in complete control of the outcomes, you start looking at something else. How much of yourself you're willing to give. Because the space will take everything that you offer it. And if you don't decide where that stops, it won't. So the real question becomes, how do you stay here without giving or losing yourself in it? And I still haven't come up with a completely clean answer. But I think it starts with understanding that no amount of effort is a direct guarantee. That recognition isn't owed under any circumstance. And that value does not have to be returned. And somehow, with those understandings, deciding that you are still willing to do it. Not because it leads somewhere, but because you want to choose it. The process, the journey. And at some point, that's what it comes down to. That you're not concerned with if it works or pays off, but that you're willing to keep going without the answer. And deciding each day whether or not you're willing to be a nobody in a personality-driven space.